The truth about rust removal is far older and far simpler than most people realize. Walk into any auto parts store and the message is clear. Rust is a problem that requires specialized chemicals, branded solutions, and often a mechanic's intervention. Entire shelves are dedicated to converters, stabilizers, and treatments promising to stop corrosion before it eats through the metal that keeps machines alive. But long before those products existed, long before modern auto manufacturing, craftsmen across multiple civilizations had already discovered something surprising. Rust did not always mean the death of metal. Under the right chemical conditions, corrosion could be halted, stripped away, and even prevented from returning. What makes this discovery remarkable is not its complexity, but its simplicity. The same reaction that dissolves rust on a modern truck frame was already being used, often unintentionally, by Roman craftsmen, African iron forgers, Japanese sword polishers, and later by mechanics maintaining military equipment during the 20th century. At the center of this long chain of rediscovered knowledge is a liquid so common that it rarely attracts attention. It costs only a few dollars, requires no mechanical expertise, and relies on chemistry understood centuries before modern industry began selling rust solutions in branded containers. This is not merely a story about corrosion. It is a story about technological memory, how practical knowledge moves through history, disappears into obscurity, and then quietly reappears when people once again need to solve the same problems. To understand why such a simple chemical reaction has resurfaced again and again, we have to begin with the moment humans first learned to shape iron. The fight against rust began the moment iron tools changed civilization. Iron changed the world in ways that are difficult to overstate. When societies learned to smelt and forge it, tools became stronger, weapons more durable, and agricultural productivity expanded dramatically. But iron arrived with a weakness that earlier metals like bronze did not share to the same degree. It reacts aggressively with oxygen and moisture. The result is rust. Rust forms when iron atoms interact with oxygen and water, reorganizing into iron oxide. This new compound occupies more volume than the original metal, creating the familiar flaking, swelling corrosion that eventually weakens the structure beneath it. Ancient blacksmiths noticed something important almost immediately. Rust was not simply cosmetic damage, it spread. Once corrosion began, it accelerated as cracks opened pathways for moisture and air to reach deeper layers of metal. For early civilizations, replacing iron tools was both expensive and labor-intensive. Maintaining them became a crucial survival skill. And in the process of trying to protect those tools, craftsmen stumbled upon a rather useful chemical relationship. Certain acidic liquids interacted with rust in ways that stripped it away. Roman craftsmen likely encountered rust-dissolving acids through their everyday trades. Archaeological evidence from Roman industrial sites reveals something quite interesting about the environments where iron tools were maintained. Many workshops were located near tanning pits and fermentation areas used in leatherworking and food preparation. These processes, they produced organic acids naturally, particularly weak acids created by fermentation. In such environments, iron tools sometimes ended up soaking in liquids rich in acidic compounds. When those tools were later cleaned and reused, craftsmen noticed something unexpected. The rust had loosened. Flaky corrosion layers could be wiped away, revealing intact metal beneath. Roman texts do not describe the chemistry explicitly, but the practical effect would have been obvious to any craftsman paying attention. Acidic environments interacted with rust in ways that neutralized it. What Roman craftsmen were unknowingly observing was a reaction between iron oxide and organic acids, an early version of rust removal chemistry. African ironworking traditions discovered similar solutions through fermentation. Centuries later and thousands of kilometers away, blacksmiths in West Africa developed some of the most advanced ironworking traditions outside of Europe and Asia. Among the Yoruba and other ironworking cultures, blacksmiths maintained tools through techniques passed down by apprenticeship and observation, rather than written manuals. Ethnographic research into these traditions reveals an intriguing pattern. Fermented plant liquids were sometimes used during cleaning and maintenance of iron tools. So, fermentation produces mild organic acids, including acetic acid. When rusted metal came into contact with these liquids, the same reaction occurred that Roman craftsmen had unknowingly triggered centuries earlier. Iron oxide began to dissolve, and what remained beneath was solid metal, ready to be sharpened, reforged, or protected. Now, these blacksmiths, they weren't performing chemistry experiments in the modern sense. They were simply observing cause and effect. If rusted metal touched certain liquids, the corrosion weakened and could be removed. That observation alone was enough to preserve valuable tools in agricultural societies where iron represented both wealth and survival. Japanese sword maintenance, you see, refined rust control into an art form. Few cultures treated steel with more discipline than the craftsmen responsible for maintaining Japanese swords. The forging of a blade required enormous effort. Layers of steel were repeatedly folded, hammered, hardened, and polished in a process designed to balance strength with flexibility. Allowing rust to spread across such a blade would destroy weeks of work. To prevent this, sword maintenance specialists known as togishi developed careful cleaning methods that controlled oxidation before it could advance. Part of their maintenance routine involved mild acidic compounds combined with polishing techniques that removed early rust without damaging the blade. Once cleaned, the steel was coated with protective oil. The goal was not simply to remove rust, but to interrupt the chemical reaction before it could spread. In effect, these craftsmen were managing corrosion through controlled chemistry, long before modern rust treatments existed. The chemistry behind rust removal is surprisingly straightforward. Rust, chemically speaking, is iron oxide. Acids interact with iron oxide in predictable ways. They break down the compound and transform it into soluble substances that detach from the metal surface. One of the most accessible acids capable of performing this reaction is acetic acid. Acetic acid is the primary active component of common household vinegar. In the typical concentrations found in household vinegar, around 5%, the acid is strong enough to dissolve rust gradually without aggressively eating through intact steel when used carefully. When rusted metal is submerged in vinegar, the acetic acid reacts with iron oxide and weakens the corrosion layer. After sufficient exposure, the rust softens and can be scrubbed away or rinsed off. The underlying steel remains intact. What appears to be a miracle solution is actually a very old chemical reaction. 20th century military mechanics rediscovered the same principle under pressure. Large armies operate in environments where corrosion spreads quickly. Mud, salt water, humidity, and constant exposure to the elements create ideal conditions for rust. During the 20th century, especially during the World War II, military mechanics often had to maintain equipment in field conditions where specialized supplies were limited. Field maintenance manuals encouraged improvisation. If proper rust removal tools were unavailable, soldiers used whatever chemistry they had access to that could break down corrosion. Weak acids once again proved useful. Improvised solutions capable of dissolving rust helped keep weapons, vehicle parts, and equipment functional when replacement parts were unavailable. The same basic reaction that ancient craftsmen had stumbled upon reappeared again in modern industrial warfare. Today's rust removers and converters often appear sophisticated. Bottles advertise specialized formulas, advanced protection, and professional-grade treatments. In many cases, those products are effective, but their chemical foundations are rarely mysterious. Many rely on acids or compounds designed to react with iron oxide. Some dissolve rust. Others convert it into more stable compounds like iron phosphate that resist further corrosion. What has changed is not the chemistry but the packaging, concentration, and the convenience. The underlying reactions have actually been part of practical metal maintenance for centuries. The deeper story here is really about how knowledge fades and then returns. History shows that useful knowledge rarely disappears completely. Instead, it kind of becomes fragmented. Techniques that were once passed down through craft traditions slowly fade as industrial production replaces repair culture. Consumer products step in and replace hands-on understanding. Over time, the original knowledge behind those techniques just becomes obscure. Rust removal, for example, illustrates this pattern pretty clearly. Ancient craftsmen discovered effective solutions through careful observation. Later generations, they rediscovered them out of necessity. Modern industry repackaged them into products. None of these steps were malicious. They reflect changing economic systems and technological priorities. But they create the illusion that simple solutions must be modern inventions. Often they are anything but. Self-reliance has always depended on understanding materials. For most of history, people could not afford to discard damaged tools. Iron tools were repaired, cleaned, sharpened, and preserved repeatedly. That reality forced people to understand how metal behaved, how moisture triggered corrosion, how acids interacted with rust, how oils protected surfaces. Those observations formed a kind of practical chemistry passed down through generations of craftsmen. It was not written in textbooks. It was learned through use, and it allowed tools to survive years or decades longer than they otherwise would have. Rust is often treated as an unstoppable force that inevitably destroys metal. History tells a more complicated story. Across centuries and cultures, people discovered that corrosion could be managed, slowed, and sometimes reversed using surprisingly simple chemistry. From Roman workshops to African forges, from Japanese sword polishing rooms to wartime motor pools, the same lesson appeared again and again. Metal fails when we ignore how it behaves. But when people pay attention, when they experiment, observe, and pass down what they learn, even ordinary materials reveal useful secrets. That is the kind of overlooked history worth remembering. If you enjoy uncovering forgotten knowledge like this, the practical technologies and hidden lessons buried inside everyday history, subscribe to Hidden in History. And if you believe more people should understand the deeper stories behind the tools we rely on, share this video and help keep these lessons alive.